53, world famous, and scarred by scandal. She was just 18, the daughter of a Nobel Prize-winning playwright. No one believed it could last. Some called it madness. Some called it exploitation. But against all odds, it became one of Hollywood's greatest love stories. Through exile, trials, and decades of change, their bond never broke. This is the love story the world doubted, but history never forgot. The year was 1942. The world was at war, and Hollywood glittered like a dream built on fragile foundations. Movie screens offered escape, and no face was more beloved than Charlie Chaplin's. For decades, he had been the world's clown, the master of silent comedy, the man who made millions laugh while carrying deep loneliness inside. But behind the mask of the little tramp lay a man nearing the autumn of his life. At 53, Chaplin was tired, scarred by failed marriages and hounded by scandal. Fame was everywhere, yet peace was nowhere. At the same time, in a very different corner of the world, a young girl was stepping into her own uncertain future. Her name was Oona O'Neill, the daughter of one of America's greatest playwrights, Eugene O'Neill, but her father had walked out of her life when she was only 2. She grew up with her mother in New Jersey, always feeling the shadow of a father's absence. By 17, Oona had beauty that could stop time, but also a loneliness that no one noticed behind the brightness of her smile. Hollywood opened its doors to her like it always did for the young and beautiful. Invitations to grand parties came quickly. Actors, producers, and directors watched her every move. For them, she was a spark of fresh light in a town obsessed with glamour. For Oona, it was dazzling, but also empty lights without warmth. And then, fate intervened. Oona was introduced to a man the world already worshipped but she barely knew, Charlie Chaplin. Their first meeting was simple, almost ordinary, but something about it lingered. Oona was drawn to the quiet sadness in Chaplin's eyes, so different from the laughter he created on screen. Chaplin, in turn, saw in Oona a purity, a gentle strength that felt like a lifeline. To the outside world, they seemed an impossible pair, a teenage girl and a man old enough to be her father, separated by nearly 4 decades of life. But in that first encounter, an invisible thread was tied. Neither of them knew then that this unlikely connection would grow into one of Hollywood's most enduring and unexpected love stories. It was only the beginning, the moment when 2 souls, lost in their own ways, first recognized each other in the chaos of fame and war. As the months passed in 1942, the world outside Hollywood was burning with war. Newspapers were filled with stories of soldiers, bombings, and rationing. But inside Chaplin's Beverly Hills mansion, another story was beginning, a story that no one expected. Oona, still only 17, found herself visiting Chaplin more often. What started as brief conversations at parties turned into long evenings where the two spoke about books, art, and the meaning of life. Oona was fascinated by his mind, so sharp, so full of stories from another age. And Chaplin, who had once been the poorest boy on the streets of London, felt a kind of peace in her gentle presence. Their connection was not about glamour or fame. Oona did not chase him for his celebrity, and Chaplin did not seek her only for her beauty. Something deeper began to grow in understanding that surprised even them. When Chaplin laughed, Oona's laughter followed, light and musical. When Oona spoke of her loneliness without her father, Chaplin's eyes softened, for he too knew the pain of abandonment. But outside their quiet moments, the world was quick to judge. Hollywood whispered, "What was a 53-year-old man doing with a teenage girl?" Magazines speculated. Friends raised their eyebrows. To many, the relationship seemed doomed from the start. Too much age, too much scandal, too much difference. Oona's father, Eugene O'Neill, was furious. The great playwright who had abandoned his daughter now reappeared in anger, threatening to disown her if she continued to see Chaplin. To him, it was madness, a disgrace. But Oona did not turn away. For the first time in her young life, she had found someone who truly listened, who saw her not as a child or a pretty face, but as a soul worth cherishing. Meanwhile, Chaplin, though wary of the world's eyes, felt something stirring inside him that he thought had died long ago: hope. After years of broken marriages, lawsuits, and scandals, here was a girl who reminded him that love could still be innocent, still be real. It was not yet a declaration, not yet a promise, but in the hushed evenings when the world outside raged with war, Oona and Chaplin discovered a fragile, forbidden tenderness, something that neither fame nor gossip could erase. This was the moment when the impossible began to feel inevitable. By early 1943, whispers had turned into open condemnation. Hollywood's golden world had little tolerance for love that defied its unwritten rules. Paparazzi circled Chaplin's home, eager to capture the forbidden pair. Gossip magazines described Oona as a child caught in the spell of an old man, and Chaplin as a scandalous figure chasing youth to hide from his own aging shadow. The criticism was merciless, but what the world could not see was the quiet truth behind closed doors. For Oona, every evening spent with Chaplin was like stepping into another universe. He told her about his childhood in the slums of London, the hunger, the music halls, the rise from nothing. She listened, spellbound, her heart breaking at the loneliness he had endured. For Chaplin, Oona was like a spring breeze, gentle, fresh, uncorrupted by cynicism. Still, the pressure grew heavier. Oona's father, Oona O'Neill, made good on his threat. He severed all ties with her, declaring that she was no longer his daughter if she continued her relationship with Chaplin. For Oona, the wound was deep. She had hoped for love from a father who had abandoned her, but instead she was left with rejection. Yet in the midst of that pain, she clung to Chaplin even more tightly. For Chaplin, the decision was just as difficult. He knew the risks: public outrage, political enemies, even the potential ruin of his career. Yet as he watched Oona endure her father's hatred, he realized something undeniable: he loved her. Not with the reckless passion of youth, but with the steady fire of a man who had found the one person who could heal him. The world saw a scandal, but to them, it was salvation. In the spring of 1943, Chaplin and Oona made a choice that silenced the whispers forever. Against the storm of criticism, they married. Oona was only 18. Chaplin was 54. To outsiders, it looked like folly. To them, it was the beginning of a lifelong devotion. The marriage shocked Hollywood, and many predicted it would not last a year. But history would prove them wrong. What began as a forbidden story was about to transform into one of the most enduring love stories the silver screen had ever witnessed. When Charlie Chaplin and Oona O'Neill married in June 1943, the news sent shockwaves through Hollywood and beyond. Headlines screamed about the age gap, about scandal, about betrayal of social norms. Some mocked them, others pitied them, and very few believed the marriage would survive. But Chaplin and Oona ignored the noise. In their quiet world, they chose to simply live. The first years of their marriage were not easy. Chaplin was one of the most recognized men in the world, and every move they made was followed, criticized, or twisted by the press. Political enemies also grew louder, accusing Chaplin of being un-American during a time of war. He faced lawsuits, trials, and accusations that threatened his career and reputation. Through it all, Oona never wavered. Barely 18, she carried a grace and resilience far beyond her years. Where others saw a fragile girl, Chaplin saw his anchor. When courtrooms filled with accusations, Oona sat silently beside him, her calm presence a shield against humiliation. When the world shouted that he was finished, she whispered that she believed in him. Together, they began to build a family. In 1944, their first child was born. More children followed, and with each birth, the bond between them grew stronger. Chaplin, who had once lived in emptiness despite worldwide fame, now found himself surrounded by laughter, love, and the chaos of a growing household. For Oona, the wounds of her father's rejection healed slowly as she created a home where love was unconditional. But Hollywood never forgave Chaplin. The scandals, the politics, and the critics did not disappear. In 1952, when Chaplin traveled to Europe for a film premiere, the US government refused to allow him back into the country. After decades in America, Chaplin was suddenly in exile. For most men, it would have been the final blow. Yet Oona, once again, stood firm. She renounced her American citizenship and chose Switzerland with her husband, trading Hollywood glamour for a quiet life in the Swiss Alps. To the world, it seemed like a fall from grace. To them, it was freedom. It was in that quiet exile, far from the flash of cameras and whispers of scandal, that their love matured into something few believed possible. A partnership built not on appearances, but on faith, loyalty, and enduring devotion. Life in Switzerland was quiet, almost the opposite of everything Chaplin had known. Gone were the roaring crowds, the constant flashes of cameras, the endless gossip. In their place came snow-dusted mornings, the stillness of the mountains, and the chaos of children filling the halls of their grand Swiss estate, Manoir de Ban. For Chaplin, now in his 60s, this life was a rebirth. He had built his fortune and his fame, but what he truly cherished was the simple sound of his children's laughter echoing through the halls. He would sit at his piano, playing soft melodies while Oona and the children gathered around. Sometimes he would perform little pantomimes for them, the same silent comedy that once moved millions, now performed only for the ones he loved most. Oona, still so young but already the mother of a growing family, dedicated herself entirely to Chaplin and the children. She left behind her own ambitions in Hollywood, trading a life of potential stardom for a life of devotion. Some called her sacrifice tragic, but to Oona, it was the life she wanted, the family she had longed for since childhood. As the years passed, their family grew larger. Eventually, 8 children filled their home. Friends who visited were often struck by the joy and warmth within the Chaplin household. Despite the exile, despite the controversies of the past, Chaplin had finally found peace. And at the center of it all was Oona, the quiet force who kept the family together, who protected him from bitterness and reminded him daily that love was greater than fame. But time was relentless. Chaplin's body grew frailer with age, though his spirit remained lively. Even in his 80s, he would walk the gardens of their estate, telling stories, making the children laugh, or simply holding Oona's hand in silence. The man who had once been the world's most famous entertainer now belonged only to his family, and they cherished him. Through it all, Oona never left his side. What had once been called scandal, folly, and madness by the world had become a love story that endured the test of decades. The final years of Charlie Chaplin's life were filled with quiet reflection. The man who had once been the world's most recognized face now lived in near seclusion at Manoir de Ban, the family estate in Switzerland. His steps grew slower, his health weaker, but his spirit, his humor, never abandoned him. Even in his frailty, Chaplin could still make his children laugh with a simple expression, a tiny gesture, or a whispered joke. By the mid-1970s, Chaplin was in his late 80s. The world had already begun honoring him again. Film retrospectives, tributes, and awards flooded in. In 1972, after decades of exile, he returned briefly to America to receive an honorary Academy Award. When he walked onto the stage, frail and supported, the audience of Hollywood's greatest stars rose to their feet and gave him a 12-minute standing ovation, the longest in Oscar history. It was as though the world was finally apologizing to the man it had once cast out. Yet even as fame came rushing back, Chaplin's world remained centered on Oona. She was no longer the young girl who had once shocked society with her marriage. She was now the matriarch of a vast family, fiercely devoted to her husband. Every step of his decline, Oona was there, reading to him when he could no longer read, helping him walk when his legs betrayed him, protecting his dignity when illness tried to strip it away. On Christmas Day, 1977, Charlie Chaplin passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was 88 years old. The world mourned the loss of a genius, but for Oona, it was the loss of her life's greatest love. Friends say she was inconsolable, yet she carried on with quiet strength, living out her years in the home they had built together. For Oona, there was no second chapter, no new love. She devoted the rest of her life to preserving Chaplin's memory and raising their children. She remained the guardian of his legacy until her own death in 1991. Their love story had begun as a scandal, ridiculed by newspapers and condemned by society. Yet it ended as one of the greatest romances of the 20th century. Chaplin, the clown who made the world laugh, and Oona, the young woman who gave him peace, had shared 34 years of love, a lifetime compressed into a single, unforgettable story. And perhaps that is the truest legacy of Charlie Chaplin. Not the fame, not the films, not the fortune, but the simple truth that, in the end, even the world's greatest star needed only one thing: love.
Thanks you for watch. Every old story holds a lesson worth remembering. If you enjoyed this one, subscribe for watch and listen more old times, real stories, and don't forget,